Welcome to Excel Basics video number 3. This is our third introductory video. And in this video, we got to talk about counting and adding with these 5 amazing Excel functions. We're going to look at how to use the count function, sum, COUNTIFS, and SUMIFS. The goal of this video is to learn how to count and add with different Excel functions. Now let's go over to the sheet Data Calculations. And of course, this workbook, you can download it so you can follow along, or you can download the PDF notes. The links are below the video. Now, we're going to learn how to count and add with this small data set. At the top, we have our column headers, or sometimes they're called field names, date, sales rep, sales. Now, when we're talking about counting or adding, we have to make a distinction. If I need to count how many times GG occurs in this column, I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4. But if I'm going to try and add the sales that GG had, then I'm going to have to come over to the sales column and add 200 plus 200 plus 500 plus 200. Now, that seems simple to try and distinguish between count and adding, or in our case, we'll say summing. But the thing is, there's lots of functions in Excel. Count, COUNTA, COUNTIFS. But you always know that you're counting when you see the word count. Count, COUNTA, COUNTIFS, those functions count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. When we see functions with sum, like sum or sum in SUMIFS, those functions will add the numbers. Now, we're going to start off with counting, and we're going to use the count function. Now, the count function only counts numbers. So if you have a column with numbers and you need to count how many sales there are or how many transactions or records there are, then we would use this column and count all the numbers. It would go through and say how many? 1, 2, 3, count all the way to 9. So let's see how to use the count function. Now I'm going to click in cell E4. We start all our formulas with an equal sign. And I got to show you a great trick for figuring out which function to use. And we already saw this earlier in the class when we saw average. I'm going to type COU. And just like that, I see there's a bunch of count functions. And if you don't know what each one of these functions for counting does, simply look at the one that's highlighted in blue, and off to the side there's a screen tip. This one says counts the number of cells in the range that contains numbers. I can use the down arrow key and read the next function. COUNTA counts the number of cells in the range that are not empty. We actually use COUNTA a lot when we have words to count. Down arrow. I'm not even going to go over and read this. That one I can figure out. Count blank. That would actually count how many empty cells there were. That function is used when you need to figure out how many times the person entering the data forgot to enter data, meaning how many empty cells there are. Down arrow, down arrow. COUNTIFS counts the number of cells specified by a given set of conditions or criteria. The example we'll use is we'll tell COUNTIFS to count how many GGs are in this column. All right, so when you type the beginning letters for a particular function, you can teach yourself by going through each one of them and reading the screen tip. All right, I'm going to stop on count. And when I see the function I want highlighted in blue, I hit the tab key. Now, count has value 1, value 2 arguments. But we only have one column, so we only need to simply highlight. And remember, when you highlight with your selection cursor, if you make a mistake, as long as the dancing ants are still going, you're in full edit mode. I'm going to stop exactly highlighting all the values in the sales column. Close parentheses, Control Enter. And sure enough, it counted all the numbers. Now, since it only counts numbers, if I had text here, for example, I'm going to select that cell and type HAN. When I hit Enter, instantly the count function counts only the numbers, so it gets a count of 8. Now I'm going to undo this with Control Z. I'm back to 9. Now, COUNTA technically counts cells that are not empty. So it'll count anything, numbers, text, dates, and other data. But let's try it. This function is often used when you need to count the total number of records or transactions, or for us, sales, and the column happens to have text. So in cell F4 equals COUNTA. I'm going to use the Tab key because I see my function is highlighted in blue, Tab. Now I'm simply going to click with my selection cursor, drag through all of the records, come up, close parentheses, and Control Enter. It totally worked. But watch this. If there is a number there, 100, it's not going to change. COUNTA will count everything, meaning any cell that's not empty. But now watch this. If I click there and hit the Delete key, instantly, now it's counting the cells that are not empty. Now I'm going to Control Z to get back to GG. Count, COUNTA. Sum, of course, we know exactly what this does. And we know the keyboard for it. The keyboard for the sum function is Alt equals. Now remember, we talked about this before. When we use functions that try to help us by guessing, you have to verify that the range is correct. That range is totally not correct. But no problem. Remember, we're in full edit mode. So I'm going to click and highlight. And the sum function will go through and add. It will not count. So when I Control Enter, 2,400. That's the total for the entire column. Now, most of the time when we are building solutions in Excel, we are not required to simply use the sum function and add everything, or use the count function or the COUNTA function and count everything. Usually, we're only interested in certain items in our data set. So for example, if I type GG up here and enter, if my goal is to add GG sales, well, I can't use the sum function because the sum function would add all of them. And I would never use the sum function and manually highlight just the cells for GG. That is inefficient. No problem. We're going to use the SUMIFS. The SUMIFS function will not sum all of them. It will only sum some of them if our condition or criteria is met. And for us, it will be, please add all GG sales. Similarly, we'll use the COUNTIFS. COUNTIFS will simply look through this column. It will not count everything. It'll only count exactly when it finds GG. So we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm going to come over to cell F11. This will be the first time we've seen the COUNTIFS function. Equals COUNTIF. And we see the if without the s. We don't want to use that. That's one of the older functions. We want a down arrow or type the s. We want to use the COUNTIFS with an s. So I hit the Tab key. Now we see our screen tip. And this will be the first time that we're going to have to enter multiple items into a function. Now if you think about it, of course we're going to have to highlight the whole column. Then we're going to have to tell COUNTIFS which one of the items to count. Now, this is a screen tip, and function screen tips always have what are called arguments. Criteria range 1, that's the first argument. Then we're going to have to enter a second argument, criteria 1. Now, how do you decide what to put in both of these arguments? Well, they both say criteria, but that's the only one that says range. Well, of course, range means a bunch of cells. So when you see criteria range 1, that means you highlight the entire range with all the items you potentially want to count. Now we're looking at our screen tip, and notice that criteria range 1 is bold. Then look, there's a comma. You have to type a comma to get to the next argument. So watch this. When I type a comma, the screen tip is totally polite. it highlights the next argument you need to put in. Criteria 1. Notice it doesn't say range, so that reminds me that that's the argument that gets the single item. So I'm going to click on the cell with GG. Now COUNTIFS has all it needs. And watch this. This is a great trick with screen tips. You can click on whichever argument it is, and it will highlight it. Now notice COUNTIFS has all the items to count and then the one specific item. Now later, if you were entering criteria range 2, criteria 2, and so on, you'd enter more arguments. But for us, we very carefully want to come to the end, not with my selection cursor, but with my I-beam cursor and click. Now I can simply close parentheses, Control Enter. It totally obeyed. Now if I come up here and change Dawn to GG, Control Enter, now I get a count of 5. But be careful. If I type GG extra space and hit Enter, it absolutely will not work. A space in Excel is a character, just like it's a character on your keyboard. So when you are looking for GG, even though it's invisible to us, when I click in this cell and hit F2, that's not invisible to Excel. Excel sees 5 characters. So you've got to be careful. I'm going to backspace and Enter. And now it's back to 5. Now I'm going to undo this with Control Z, Z, and Z to get back to Dawn. Now that's counting with one condition. Now let's try adding with a single condition. Equals SUMIFS. And again, we don't want to use the if. The history of Excel, there was the if. That only adds with one condition. In 2007, we got the one with the S. The one with the S does everything that the one without the S does, because we can add with one or more conditions. I'm going to hit Tab. Not only that, but if you use that other version, the arguments are reversed, and the names of the arguments are not as clear. So I like to use the SUMIFS all the time, even when we only have one condition. Now there's 3 arguments we need to enter. Sum range, criteria range 1, and criteria 1. And the way I remember is it says sum range. That means please give me all the numbers you potentially want to add. It has the word sum, so that's the one with the numbers. Always when we're using SUMIFS, we have to have sum range with numbers we want to add. So for sum range, I'm going to highlight the whole column. All right, now this function requires 3 arguments. And notice the screen tip will remind you it has a little comma. You see sum range bold, but as soon as I type a comma, now the next argument is bold. Now it says criteria range. Remember, we're trying to add all of the sales for GG. Because it has criteria range, that means please give me all the potential items I need to search through. So I'm going to highlight the entire sales rep column. Now, if you do that by mistake, you'll get an error because the 2 ranges have to be the same size. So be sure and highlight the entire column. Now notice it says range with a 1, so I'm going to type a comma. This says criteria 1. It doesn't say the word range, and range always means a bunch of items. So this is the argument where we put the single condition that we want. We want to tell SUMIFS to only add the sales for GG. Now before I enter this, SUMIFS will actually look through this column. It'll ask the question for each one of these rows or records, are you equal to GG? Because that's false, it won't use that number. Are you equal to GG? True, so it uses that number. Are you equal to GG? False, it's not going to use any of those because those aren't GG. But of course, when it gets down here, it'll say true for all 3, so it will grab all 3 of those numbers. Now I'm going to come over here, close parentheses, Control Enter, and that is totally amazing. If I come over here and type GG and enter. That formula totally updates. Now I'm going to Control Z to undo that. Now when you do this for the first time, you want to try and prove to yourself that that's the correct total. Now I typed easy examples so you can add these in your head. But here's a great trick. If these aren't easy numbers, I'm going to click on the first number. Now I'm going to hold the Control key. And then with my selection cursor, I'm going to click and drag. I've highlighted 1, 2, 3, 4 cells that are not next to each other. Now come down to the status bar. And sure enough, down in the status bar, any cells that you have highlighted, it will tell you the sum, count, and average. And sure enough, it got exactly count of 4, sum of 1,100. That's exactly what our functions got. Now, our last two examples are going to be not counting GG sales. We want to count just the sales on 10/23/2017. So I'm going to delete this up here, and I'm going to type 10/23/2017 and enter. Now, I added some visual cues here just so we, as we're learning, understand that the COUNTIFS and SUMIFS functions are not going to count everything or add everything. They're just looking through and only picking out the correct ones. For us, it'll come from looking through the date column and finding 1023. All right, you ready? I'm going to click in cell F13 equals COUNTIFS tab. Criteria range, that's all of the possible items we need to look through. Right, so I'm going to highlight the whole date column. Criteria range 1. I type a comma. Now I get to criteria 1. Criteria 1 does not have the word range, so that's where you put the one single item that you want for counting. Now COUNTIFS will know to go through and count only the cells that have 10/23/2017. Close parentheses. I'm going to hit Tab. It totally got the correct count. Now I'm going to do the sum. Equals sum if, and I don't want to use the one without the S. I'm going to use the one with the S for both COUNTIFS and SUMIFS. All right, sum range. It has the word sum, so that reminds me that those are all the potential numbers that I want to add. Notice I'm totally allowed to add them all, but SUMIFS is not going to add them all. Now I type a comma to get to the next argument. Criteria range 1. The range reminds me that I have to highlight the entire date column because I need SUMIFS to look through all of the dates. Now I come over here. I type a comma. That argument doesn't have the word range, just criteria, so that's where we put our single condition. Now, before we enter this, SUMIFS will totally go through this entire column and ask for each date. Are you equal to 10/23/2017? True, so it'll use that number. True, it'll use that number. False, 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 it's not going to use any of those numbers. True, it's going to use that number, and so on. Close parentheses and enter. $600. I'm going to do my little trick. I'm going to highlight these two. Hold Control, click. Hold Control, click. And I'm looking down in the status bar. This is a trick that's great when you're learning. You want to kind of prove to yourself that it actually did it correctly. Now I'm going to come over here and edit that and change that 24 to a 3. As soon as I hit Enter, I have a count of 5. I have a sum of 700. These are both examples of counting and adding with a single condition or criteria. Now I want to Control Z, and I'm going to delete this up here so that color goes away. All right, now this is exciting. You can go to the homework sheets or after the homework sheets, and there's 3 homework problems that cover the introductory videos 1 to 3. Homework problem number 1, there's written instructions at the top and some data here, and you have to complete that homework problem. Now, there's answers over here after you've completed this homework problem and done all your work. Then you can go check your answer. So click right there. Oh, just for a second and click back. Don't go look there and ruin the fun of you doing this homework problem before you've completed it. homework 2, homework 3. Those are some fun homework problems for you to do. I'm going to click back on data and calculations. All right, so in this video, very important topic, counting and adding. We do it all the time, not just in business, but lots of other fields and endeavors. Count function will count just number. COUNTA will count not empty. Sum adds them all. COUNTIFS will count with a given condition or criteria. And SUMIFS will add with a certain condition or criteria. All right, that's it for introductory video number 3. Our next introductory video will be number 4. That'll be our final introductory video. And in our next video, we're going to see how to use the most amazing feature in Excel called a pivot table. Now, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up and comment and sub, because there's always lots more videos from Excel is Fun. And we'll see you next video.